She's standing very still when we first see her. On an August afternoon in 1892 at Marble House on Bellevue Avenue in Newport, Rhode Island, a Vanderbilt daughter waits at the top of the grand stair while her mother inspects the set of her shoulders. Below, the 50-room summer cottage glows with late light on marble walls and gilt moldings, the work of Richard Morris Hunt and an army of artisans paid from railroad fortunes. A maid smooths the ivory kid gloves along the girl's wrists. Alva Vanderbilt's fingers give one last precise tug at the buttons, as if tightening the boundaries of a life. In a nearby sitting room, a society photograph album lies open to an earlier ball. Later, her daughter Consuelo will remember the posture rods, the governesses, and the injunction, "I do the thinking, you do as you are told." Outside, the carriages queue for the evening drive past the breakers, rising down the avenue as another Vanderbilt palace. Inside, the only sound is the rustle of silk, the faint creak of whalebone stays, the soft snap of glove leather. In this house, built as a birthday gift costing $11 million, the ritual looks like grace. It is also a rehearsal for a life in which almost everything has already been decided. By the summer of 1892 in Newport, 11-year-old Consuelo Vanderbilt moved through Marble House according to a clockwork of lessons and appearances. The marble stair treads are cool under thin kid slippers as she descends at 9 each morning. Her day is divided between French music and posture exercises supervised by governesses in the private schoolroom Alva Vanderbilt created on the upper floor. Her memoir, The Glitter and the Gold, would later recall the discipline of those years. The steel back brace that forced her spine ramrod straight, the riding crop for infractions, the sense that even her silhouette belonged to family strategy. In a surviving photograph captioned simply, "Miss Vanderbilt, a Marble House, 1892, the gloves are immaculate. What the caption does not note is the way a child's fingers tighten inside them. Newport Society columns describe Marble House as a social landmark, a stage for balls and luncheons that help transform the resort into an enclave of stone palaces. For Consuelo, the same rooms are corridors of expectation. Each morning ends with a small ritual in the mirror. She adjusts her gloves as the governess checks her posture. The hands that learn to wear gloves perfectly will one day sign a marriage contract she did not choose. In August 1895, just as the breakers opened in Newport with Gertrude Vanderbilt's midnight debutante ball, the Commodore's grandchildren moved between two worlds, the 70-room seaside palazzo and the vast Cornelius Vanderbilt II house at West 57th Street in New York. Gertrude's girlhood, reconstructed from her journals and school records, shows the same architecture of privilege, shaped slightly differently. Educated first by tutors and then at the exclusive Brearley School, she spends mornings on lessons and afternoons on tennis, yachting, and coaching drives, keeping up with brothers on the lawns of the breakers while her mother Alice oversees formal calls. Photographs from that summer show a young woman in a white gown descending the grand staircase, gloves in hand, for the ball that christens the new mansion. The New York and Newport Society pages reported the guest list with clinical precision, but not the line Gertrude later drew in her own notes, a quiet wish to be valued for what I am, not merely what I represent. In two cousins, one destined for a dukedom, one for a studio, we see the same marble corridors narrowing toward different forms of escape. When Cornelius Commodore Vanderbilt died in 1877, he left around $100 million, most of it to his son William Henry Vanderbilt. Within 2 decades, that capital had crystallized into a chain of monumental houses from Fifth Avenue to Newport. By the mid-1890s, the grandchildren, Cornelius II, William Kissam, George Washington Vanderbilt II, presided over residences that newspapers called palaces: the Triple Palace on Fifth Avenue, the Cornelius Vanderbilt II House, Marble House, the Breakers, Biltmore. Each required dozens of servants and a rigid calendar of entertainments. Each also functioned as a lesson for their daughters. Family photograph albums and guest books show the young women, Gertrude, Consuelo, their cousins, circulating as if already part of the decor, seated on carved chairs, Gloved hands folded, eyes on the camera. Later memoirs and letters hint at the cost. Hours of preparation for a single call. The awareness that every movement would be read as a signal of family standing. In the broader Gilded Age economy, fortunes from railroads, steel, and finance propelled American families into a transatlantic social market. Historians estimate roughly 100 American heiresses, soon nicknamed dollar princesses, married into European aristocracy between 1870 and 1914, trading dollars for titles and estates. For the Vanderbilt granddaughters, the palaces were not only homes, they were training grounds for export. It looked like freedom. Rooms without end, carriages at command, but every doorway opened onto another expectation. By the early 1890s in New York, Consuelo's education took place almost entirely behind the carved doors of the Fifth Avenue townhouse. She is educated entirely at home by governesses and tutors, learning languages and music under a regime so strict that her later biographers underline its severity. In The Glitter and the Gold, she recalls the steel rod fastened from shoulders to waist to correct her posture, the riding crop for minor disobedience, the moment when, objecting to a dress, she was told by Alva, "I do the thinking, you do as you are told." The posture drills end each morning with a now familiar gesture. A governess slides gloves over her hands, checking that the line from fingertip to elbow is unbroken. These are not merely lessons in carriage. They are rehearsals in yielding. The tutor's reports preserved in family papers speak approvingly of docility and excellent obedience. The girl in the records is praised for silence. Years later, when she speaks one sentence of refusal, it will be remembered as the bravest words she ever uttered. During the 1893-94 New York season, the Vanderbilt girls' days were mapped by etiquette manuals and social calendars, archival invitations, dance cards, and calling cards from the family collections show a dense schedule. French and German conversation in the mornings, piano practice, then lessons in correspondence, deportment, and hosting. A surviving letter in Consuelo's hand from this period begins with the formal, "My dear Mrs. Astor," and continues in careful, rounded script. Even the ink flow suggests discipline. Every note must be answered within 24 hours, her governess reminds her, and the acceptance or regret is as strategic as any business telegram. The rustle of paper, the faint smell of sealing wax, the soft pressure of gloves removed before writing, all become part of an invisible curriculum. Etiquette books of the time frame this feminine training as art. Yet the art had a purpose: to make young women fluent in the codes that would later govern drawing rooms in London, Paris, or at Blenheim Palace. Behind every graceful curtsy lies a ledger of alliances still to be negotiated. By the winter of 1894-95, the same girls who practiced posture in schoolrooms were moving through their first full seasons in New York and Newport. Society columns list them in tight columns of type. Miss Vanderbilt at an opera box, in a coaching party, at a luncheon for visiting European nobles. Gertrude's debut at the Breakers in August 1895 is chronicled as an event of spectacle: midnight dancing, electric lights, orchestras on the terrace. But personal notes and later interviews emphasize her ambivalence. Even as she learns the steps of the cotillion, she keeps sketchbooks in her bedroom, filling them with small watercolors instead of dance programs. In both cousins' lives, gloves reappear as tiny signals of role. For Gertrude, removing them to pick up charcoal in a New York studio becomes an act of quiet self-definition. For Consuelo, pulling them on before every call underscores that her hands, what they may choose, whom they may touch, are not yet her own. The same skills that make a perfect hostess will soon be deployed like dowry entries in an international balance sheet. Around 1900, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney began spending more time in studios than ballrooms. Records from the Art Students League of New York list her among the pupils of Hendrik Christian Andersen and James Earl Fraser. In Paris, accounts note her studies with Andrew O'Connor and private criticism from Auguste Rodin. In photographs from her Passy studio, she poses in a simple smock, gloves off, hands dusted, with clay. Newspaper features, half amused, describe the Vanderbilt girl sculptor working in a hayloft studio off McDougal Alley, marveling that a woman of such fortune would choose such surroundings. Yet Whitney still moves between two scripts. Dinner at the Fifth Avenue house or the Breakers requires the old rituals: white gloves, formal gowns, precise seating. Her journals from these years, held in archival collections, float between sculptural ideas and detailed notes on social obligations. The tension is not rebellion but reallocation, refinement turned toward creation rather than mere display. While some Vanderbilt daughters are groomed to maintain houses, one begins to imagine founding a museum. What was called education was, in part, rehearsal for the negotiations that would soon move from drawing rooms to marriage contracts. On 6 November 1895, St. Thomas Church on Fifth Avenue filled with flowers, European guests, and reporters for what the press quickly dubbed the wedding of the century, the marriage of 19-year-old Consuelo Vanderbilt to Charles Spencer Churchill, 9th Duke of Marlborough. Behind the veil, Consuelo is in tears. Her memoir and later biographies describe the coercion that led to this day: Alva's threats, the locked bedroom, the feigned illness that convinced a dutiful daughter she might kill her mother by refusing. The marriage settlement is explicit. William K. Vanderbilt provides a $2.5 million trust with a guaranteed income for the Duke and a further $2.5 million covenant for his daughter, alongside a personal allowance, figures modern historians estimate in the tens of millions of today's dollars. In exchange, Vanderbilt's wealth will save Blenheim Palace. The young woman whose hands have learned to fit gloves flawlessly becomes, in the language of commentary, a dollar princess. The bouquet she carries that morning is heavy enough to hide the grip of her gloved hands. By 1897, Consuelo was Duchess of Marlborough, living at Blenheim Palace in Oxfordshire. Official photographs show her on the palace terraces, elegant and composed. Local papers praise her charitable work and her support for free school meals and child health clinics, early signs of the social conscience that will later lead her into suffrage activism. Her letters and memoir, however, describe a marriage that quickly becomes emotionally distant. Marlborough, having secured both dowry and restored estate, maintains separate routines. By 1906, the couple is formally separated, though not yet divorced. The house that her fortune helped preserve is both stage and barrier. Galleries of sergeant portraits, endless corridors, and staterooms where gloves are donned for every public appearance. Consuelo adapts by redirecting her training. The same discipline once used to perfect curtsies becomes useful in committee meetings and public boards. She learns to chair discussions, draft reports, and make speeches in carefully modulated tones. British records note her later role on London County Council and in hospital administration, but the cost is clear in the glitter and the gold. "I had done my duty," she writes, "but at the expense of myself." Across the Atlantic, other Vanderbilt houses are beginning to crumble, not yet physically, but financially. In 1926, Alice Gwynne Vanderbilt finally sold the Cornelius Vanderbilt II house at Rear West 57th Street, the largest private residence ever built in Manhattan. A trust that once produced enough income to maintain both the Fifth Avenue mansion and the Breakers can no longer support the taxes and staff. Developers pay $7 million for the land and promptly replace the house with Bergdorf Goodman. Newspaper stories about the demolition speak in elegiac tones of the passing of an era. Similar fates befall other Vanderbilt houses on Millionaire's Row. William K. Vanderbilt's Petit Chateau at 1660 Fifth Avenue goes. The Triple Palace is dismantled in stages. By mid-century, all 10 of the family's Fifth Avenue mansions are gone. The fall of the House of Vanderbilt, as one family history calls it, is not a single catastrophe but a series of sales, auctions, and adaptations, as fortunes are divided among many heirs and undermined by income taxes, changing tastes, and in some cases, gambling and drink, most notoriously in the brief, wasteful life of Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, whose alcoholism and debts left his daughter Gloria a relatively modest trust. The generation that grew up surrounded by marble now finds its children fighting in courtrooms over what is left. On 4th July 1921 in Paris, Consuelo Vanderbilt married again, this time by choice, to French aviator and textile heir Jacques Balsan. Her divorce from the Duke of Marlborough has just been finalized. The marriage will later be annulled under Catholic law, but the emotional break is already complete. In the decades between separation and second marriage, Consuelo has used the tools of her upbringing in new arenas. She supports women's suffrage and social welfare causes, serves on committees, and learns to speak not only as hostess, but as advocate. The steel rod that once enforced physical posture becomes a metaphor in her memoir for a different kind of backbone. When The Glitter and the Gold appears in 1953, critics note its cool, precise tone. She recounts the wedding of the century, Blenheim's grandeur, and her mother's coercion without melodrama, allowing facts to carry their own weight. One passage describes watching tourists file through the Marlborough apartments she once inhabited, paying to see what had once been her private prison. The gloves reappear here, too, in recollection. Carefully laid in drawers before sleep, put on before audiences, removed at last in the privacy of her later homes. In 1934 in New York, newspapers labeled the custody battle over 10-year-old Gloria Vanderbilt the trial of the century. The courtroom pits the child's mother, Gloria, Morgan Vanderbilt, against her paternal aunt, sculptor and museum founder Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who seeks custody on grounds of instability and financial mismanagement. Reporters dwell on the spectacle, the famous name, the airing of private letters, the question of who will control the girl's inheritance. Beneath the headlines lies a quieter pattern, an older generation, shaped by Marble House lessons and breakers' balls, attempting to safeguard what remains of both money and reputation in a world that no longer unquestioningly reveres either. By mid-century, many of the physical symbols of Vanderbilt power are gone from Manhattan. Others, like the breakers and Marble House, have passed into the hands of the Preservation Society of Newport County, open to the public as museums. Visitors now walk through rooms once guarded by footmen, following audio tours instead of social codes. Gift shops sell postcards of ceilings under which debutantes once practiced their curtsies. In one display case, a pair of embroidered evening gloves, donated by a descendant, lies carefully lit behind glass. The leather is slightly yellowed, fingers still curved, as if remembering a hand. Outside, on Bellevue Avenue, tourists queue in summer clothes, the rustle of modern fabrics replacing the whisper of silk. The film returns to its first image, a woman's gloved hands, perfectly composed. Only now they are motionless, artifacts of a system in which grace was both art and architecture, a form of beauty that concealed, and sometimes revealed, the cost of belonging to a house that could not last.